What's the current policy of the Isle of Man regarding the nuclear industry and in particular Sellafield?
Our policy is quite clear, and it's been reaffirmed by our Parliament that we wish to see the complete closure of Sellafield, and we are opposed to any form of spent nuclear reprocessing. So we will work with other interested parties to try and achieve that aim.
Of course, that doesn't seem to be what's happening at the moment.
Certainly, well, watching closely the debate in the United Kingdom about nuclear power stations, and we're realistic that if they go down that route, then the fuel has to be reprocessed. One of our difficulties is that our friends in Cumbria are very keen on continuing this because of the economic benefits it brings. But obviously, as a very close neighbour to Sellafield, we wish to see that process stopped and ultimately cleaned up so that there's no environmental danger to the Isle of Man.
And is it because they are that close to us? Is that why the Isle of Man has this stance against the nuclear industry?
Certainly, having somebody on your neighbouring shoreline which is increasing the amount of involvement with spent nuclear reprocessing means that there's always a tendency for the United Kingdom government to look in that direction first. Indeed, Cumbria are supportive of further expansions into the underground storage of nuclear waste. So we're very concerned that that increase may have a detrimental effect on the environment on the Isle of Man.
Is it just NIMBYism though?
I think it's safeguarding your own people. This is what the United Kingdom government and indeed the people of Cumbria are trying to do. They're looking after the best interest of the people they represent. From an Isle of Man point of view, we are aware that there are inherent risks with nuclear reprocessing, and therefore we need to reassure our people that we will work with other parties to try and bring this to an end.
Now, this has been in the press now for some time, and land is being bought up around the area, yet there's been no sort of public announcement from the Isle of Man government on your stance and your objections.
Well, what you're talking about is nuclear plants, that is nuclear power generation. What we're concerned about is the reprocessing of the spent nuclear fuel and what is ultimately done for that for the thousands of years into the future. So we are monitoring closely, we're working with the Government of Ireland and other parties, and we're aware of what's going on. But this is a very lengthy process, and discussions go on at a regular basis between our government in the United Kingdom and indeed the nuclear decommissioning arm of that government.
But the UK government didn't consult you before they started this process going again about using Sellafield in the future for more storage of nuclear waste?
Well, it's not a case of consulting. We are involved with all of these bodies on a regular ongoing basis. So whenever any new initiatives come forward, we are aware of those from the first days, and we are a party to being involved in those discussions. So it's not as if the United Kingdom government is doing anything without our knowledge. At the moment, there has been a recent announcement which means that there may be certain areas in Cumbria being looked at as nuclear power plants. That's something we're aware of, it's something we're monitoring. Our main concern is more to do with what happens to the spent fuels, and the proliferation of any increased work at Sellafield will cause the government concern.
At the end of the day, and I'll put this as polite as I can, the Isle of Man and the UK, I mean, they're just the big brother and they're not really going to listen to the Isle of Man, are they, at all on this one?
There would be a danger of that if we were working in isolation, but we are partnering with the Republic of Ireland. They are a fellow member of the European Union. We're working with the devolved parliaments of Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and all of their shores come into the same Irish Sea. Therefore, it's not as if the Isle of Man is working in isolation. Although we are one of the main at the forefront of it, we realise that we will be able to be ignored more easily if we're in isolation. We have partnered with the Republic of Ireland, and certainly I believe that the UK government would be at fault were they not to listen to both the Isle of Man and their European neighbours. But
they haven't consulted you so far?
We're in constant consultation. I think there's a misunderstanding regarding a consultation over a particular specific plan. So we are aware of everything that's going on, and we make representations at appropriate times to all of those new initiatives. And we're constantly monitoring Sellafield. We have parliamentary visits to Sellafield, and therefore we are pretty well up to speed with what's happening. We're aware that the environmental levels in the Irish Sea at the moment are perfectly safe and acceptable. We want to protect that into the future.
Will you be going back to Tynwald House Keys with some sort of update for people and the public as well about the position of the Isle of Man?
That's our intention, because, as you say, there are changes ahead. One of those changes is the possibility of underground storage of spent nuclear fuel. That's something which isn't in our current policy. So yes, I will be returning to Parliament to actually seek their views on possibly updating our current policy, and that will continue to be the closure of Sellafield. It will also be to do with what happens to the spent nuclear fuel that's already there.
So you do want to close Sellafield down still?
The policy of Tynwald is quite clear that we want to see the closure of Sellafield and a tidying up for that operation. Realistically, the United Kingdom government and Cumbria have other agendas. That's why it's so difficult.
So when you go back to Parliament, will you be saying you're against the storage of nuclear fuel underground?
I think what I need to do is make sure that the political representatives of the island and indeed the people of the island are not worried by but are aware of the proposals in the United Kingdom, make them aware of it, and then to take the parliamentary response to take that forward, so that I'm speaking on behalf of the people of the Isle of Man and not just the government. But at the moment we are quite clear that the government will continue to work towards safeguarding our environment.
Have you been surprised so far that there's been really nobody raising this with you at all? I mean, they're been going ahead now for some months with various PR announcements about what's going to happen at Sellafield in the future, and yet over here no one seems to have been bothered at all about it.
Well, there's always a lot of speculation about this. This started back in June 2008, but prior to that there was many things which were signposting that these changes were in development stage. There's nothing going to be happening in the very near future. And I wouldn't want the people of the Isle of Man to be concerned at all. Our environment is safe and clean. We are monitoring closely what happens at Sellafield. We will continue to do that and to work with other parties. But at the moment, it's a suitable time to go back to Tynwald and seek their views on whether our policy is sufficiently robust and whether our partnerships with other bodies is actually achieving the desired outcome.